Hello everyone, welcome to English Mastery Hub. Today, we will learn about an important real-life event. This story is about two famous leaders, Donald Trump and Volodymyr Zelensky. They met in February 2025 to talk about a serious problem, the war in Ukraine. This meeting was very important. Many people wanted to know what would happen. The war had caused a lot of pain and destruction. Both leaders had different ideas about how to stop the war. Trump wanted to find a peaceful solution through talks. Zelensky wanted to protect his country and keep it strong. Their meeting was not easy. They had to make big decisions, and the world was watching. But this lesson is not just about politics. It is also about learning English. You will learn how leaders talk, make agreements, and solve problems. You will also learn new words and phrases that will help you speak English better. Understanding how world leaders communicate can help you in your daily life too. When people negotiate, they try to find the best solution. They share their ideas, listen to others, and try to agree. This happens not only in politics, but also in work, school, and daily life. You might need to negotiate with your boss, teacher, or friends. That's why learning these skills in English is useful. By the end of this lesson, you will understand what happened in this important meeting. You will also improve your English skills. These skills will help you in conversations, discussions, and even job interviews. Are you ready? Let's begin. Before we talk about what happened in this meeting, let's first understand why it was so important. For many years, Ukraine had been at war. This war caused a lot of pain and suffering. Many people had to leave their homes. Some lost their families. Cities were destroyed, and businesses could not operate. The economy was weak, and life was very hard for many Ukrainians. The country needed help to stay strong and to protect its future. Volodymyr Zelensky, the leader of Ukraine, wanted to save his country. He needed support from other nations, especially from the United States. He wanted more weapons, money, and political support to fight against Ukraine's enemies. For him, this meeting was very important. He hoped to get help from Donald Trump, the President of the United States. Donald Trump returned to power in 2025. He was famous for making deals. He believed that talking and negotiating could help solve big problems. He thought that instead of war, leaders should find agreements that help both sides. But this was not easy. Zelensky wanted protection for Ukraine. Trump wanted to focus on what was best for America. They had different goals, and it was hard to find a middle ground. This meeting was not just about two leaders talking. It was about the future of two countries and the world. Their decisions could change global relationships. If they agreed, it could bring peace and stability. If they disagreed, the war could get worse. Their meeting could also affect the economy. Many countries were watching closely. Businesses, politicians, and ordinary people wanted to know what would happen. This was a moment of great importance. It was a chance for leadership and diplomacy. It was a chance to stop suffering and create a better future. But could these two leaders find a way to work together? Could they make a deal that helped both sides? In the next part, we will look at what happened during the meeting and what they discussed. President Zelensky arrived in Washington, D.C. It was a big event. Many reporters and photographers were there. As he stepped out of the car, cameras flashed. People watched as he walked toward the White House. At the door, President Trump was waiting. He reached out his hand. Zelensky shook his hand. Both men smiled, but inside, they knew this was a serious meeting. It was not just about greetings. It was about the future of Ukraine and the relationship between the U.S. and Ukraine. After the welcome, they walked into the Oval Office, the room where the U.S. President holds important meetings. Inside, many important people were sitting: advisors, diplomats, and military officials. These people would help the two leaders discuss the difficult situation. They sat down, and the conversation began. The first words in a meeting are very important. They set the mood. They show what each leader is thinking. President Trump spoke first. He looked at Zelensky and said, "President Zelensky, I respect your courage. We all want peace, but we need to talk about how we get there." His words were polite but serious. He wanted to show that he admired Zelensky, but he also wanted to discuss peace in his own way. Trump liked making deals and agreements. He wanted to talk about negotiation. President Zelensky responded quickly. His voice was calm but strong. "Mr. President, peace cannot come at the cost of our independence. Ukraine is fighting for its survival." His words showed his determination. For him, peace was not just about making an agreement. It was about protecting Ukraine's freedom. He wanted support, not just words. At this moment, it was clear. The two leaders had different ideas. Trump saw this as a deal. He wanted to negotiate a way to end the war. He wanted peace, but also wanted to protect America's interests. He did not want to send too much help if it did not benefit the U.S. Zelensky saw this as a battle for survival. He was not looking for a deal. He was looking for support. He wanted weapons, money, and strong political backing. He believed that without help, Ukraine could lose the war. This difference in perspective made the conversation difficult. Both men wanted peace, but they had different ideas about how to achieve it. Even though they disagreed, both leaders were polite and professional. They did not shout or argue. Instead, they used formal and respectful language. In serious discussions, world leaders use phrases that sound respectful, even when they do not agree. "We all want." This phrase makes it clear that both sides have a common goal. "I respect your perspective." This phrase shows politeness, even when opinions are different. "We need to talk about how we get there." This phrase suggests working together to find a solution. Using these kinds of phrases helps keep conversations professional. Even in difficult discussions, good communication is key. The meeting was just beginning, and many important topics were still ahead. Would they find a solution? Or would their differences be too great? The next moments would decide the future. As the discussion continued, the main problem became clear. Both leaders needed to figure out what the U.S. would offer Ukraine and what Ukraine would agree to in return. The two sides had different ideas about what was important. President Zelensky asked for stronger military help. He said that Ukraine needed more advanced weapons and financial support to continue fighting. The war had caused a lot of damage, and Ukraine needed these resources to defend itself. Zelensky's focus was on survival. He wanted the U.S. to send more weapons and money to protect his country. President Trump, however, was thinking about America's needs. He was more focused on strengthening the U.S. economy. He knew that Ukraine had valuable natural resources. These resources, like rare earth minerals, were important for technology and industries in the U.S. Trump saw these resources as a key part of future agreements. He wanted to make sure that any help given to Ukraine would benefit America as well. Trump said, "America will always help, but we must be strategic. Our economy needs strong partnerships." His words made it clear that he wanted to help Ukraine, but only if it also helped the U.S. economy. He didn't want to give too much without getting something in return. For Trump, the future of America's economy was important, and he saw Ukraine's resources as an opportunity for economic growth. Zelensky replied, "Ukraine is not just looking for aid. We need security guarantees. Without them, this war will never end." Zelensky was not just asking for money or weapons. He wanted something more. He wanted a promise from the U.S. that Ukraine would be protected from future threats. Without security, he believed Ukraine could never have peace. For Zelensky, security was the most important thing, more important than money or weapons. This exchange showed how different their priorities were. Trump was focused on the economy and resources, while Zelensky was focused on the survival of his country. They both wanted an agreement, but they had different ideas about what that agreement should look like. In international negotiations like this one, it's common for leaders to have different goals. The challenge is finding a way to balance those goals and come to a solution. Both leaders wanted peace, but their methods of achieving it were very different. It was not easy to find common ground. Negotiations often involve shifting perspectives. One leader might say something to change the direction of the conversation without directly arguing. For example, Trump used the phrase, "We must be strategic." This phrase helped him explain that the U.S. needed to be careful with its resources. It was a way of shifting the focus from Ukraine's immediate needs to America's long-term goals. Zelensky used a similar strategy when he said, "This is not just about aid." By saying this, he made it clear that Ukraine needed more than just financial support. He wanted a guarantee of security, something that could protect Ukraine in the future. He was trying to shift the conversation from weapons and money to the bigger issue of safety. In negotiations, words matter. Leaders often use phrases like these to avoid direct confrontation while still making their points. The goal is not to argue, but to find a way to meet both sides' needs. This moment in the meeting was important because it showed the difficulty of international diplomacy. Even though both leaders wanted a deal, their priorities were different. It would take a lot of careful discussion and compromise to find a solution that worked for both sides. The meeting was far from over, and the next steps would be critical in deciding whether an agreement could be reached. The real tension between the two leaders came to light during a joint press conference. Both leaders were sitting in front of many journalists, and everyone was watching closely. Journalists asked tough questions, and it became clear that the differences between Trump and Zelensky were becoming more obvious. At first, Trump spoke to the press. He said, "The U.S. has done a lot for Ukraine, more than anyone, but we have to consider our own priorities too." Trump was emphasizing that the United States had already given a lot of help to Ukraine. He wanted to remind everyone that while the U.S. supported Ukraine, it was also important to think about the needs of the United States. He was trying to show that the U.S. couldn't keep giving and giving without considering its own interests. Trump's statement made it clear that he was focused on America's priorities first. He believed the U.S. had done enough, and now it was time to focus on its own future. But Zelensky did not agree. He stood up and responded firmly. This is not about what has been done. It's about what still needs to be done. Every day, lives are lost. This is about more than politics. Zelensky's words were strong and emotional. He was telling Trump that the past help was not enough. He was reminding the world that Ukraine was still in danger and needed more support. For Zelensky, it wasn't just about politics or what had been done before. It was about saving lives. Every day, people were dying because of the war. It wasn't just a political issue, it was a human issue. Zelensky wanted to make sure that everyone understood the seriousness of the situation. His words were meant to push the focus away from past actions and onto what needed to happen next. At that moment, the room became very quiet. The tension was clear. What had started as a diplomatic conversation had now turned into something much bigger. It was no longer just about making deals or agreements. It was a moment of confrontation. The press conference had turned into a public disagreement, and both leaders were showing their differences in front of the world. The weight of the war, politics, and public opinion were now in the room with them. Everyone could see that the two leaders were not agreeing on how to move forward. This was a difficult moment for both of them. Trump was trying to balance America's needs with helping Ukraine, while Zelensky was trying to make the world understand the daily struggles of his people. In moments like this, the pressure of the situation is intense. Leaders often feel the need to defend their positions, especially when they know the world is watching. But public disagreements like this one can also make the situation worse. When leaders disagree in public, it can make it harder for them to find common ground. It can also send a message to the rest of the world about how serious the situation really is. This moment in the press conference showed the emotions behind the politics. It was not just about what had been done or what might happen in the future. It was about the lives of the people in Ukraine who were suffering every day. Zelensky wanted to remind everyone that behind the politics were real people who needed help right now. The situation was urgent, and time was running out. Trump, on the other hand, was focused on the long-term strategy. He wanted to make sure that any help given to Ukraine would also benefit the United States. He didn't want to give too much without getting something in return. He believed that helping Ukraine should also help America's economy and security. This public disagreement was a powerful moment in the meeting. It showed how difficult it can be to find common ground between two leaders with different priorities. It also showed how complicated international diplomacy can be. The tension was not just between Trump and Zelensky. It was a reflection of the larger struggles happening in the world. Language tip. In speeches, leaders often use repetition to make their points stronger. For example, when Zelensky said, This is about more than politics. He was repeating the idea that the issue was bigger than just politics. By saying it again, he was making his point clearer and more emotional. When he said, "Every day lives are lost," he was reminding everyone of the human cost of the war. Repetition can make a speech more powerful and help people remember important ideas. Public disagreements can have a big impact. When leaders argue in front of the press, it can change how people see the situation. It can also affect how countries work together in the future. The disagreement between Trump and Zelensky was a reminder that diplomacy is not always easy. It can be messy, emotional, and full of tension. But even in moments like this, there is still hope for resolution. The disagreement didn't mean the meeting was over. It was just one moment in a larger conversation. Both leaders still had the opportunity to find a way to work together, even if it was difficult. In the end, the press conference was a defining moment in the meeting. It showed the challenges of international diplomacy and the real stakes involved. The world was watching, and everyone could see how high the tensions were. But despite the disagreement, both leaders were still working toward a solution. It would take time, patience, and more discussions to find common ground. But the world was waiting for answers, and the meeting had shown just how important it was to find a way forward. The meeting ended without a clear solution. After all the talks and discussions, Zelensky returned to Ukraine without any final agreements. The world was left with many unanswered questions. People around the globe wondered what would happen next and what the meeting really meant for the future. One big question was, will the United States continue to give military aid to Ukraine? Throughout the meeting, the topic of military help had been very important. Zelensky had asked for more weapons and support for Ukraine's army, but Trump had emphasized that the U.S. had to think about its own needs first. So the question was left open. Would America keep helping Ukraine in the future, or would they change their approach? Another question was, can Ukraine and the U.S. find a long-term strategy that helps both countries? The meeting showed that both countries had different needs and priorities. Ukraine needed security and help in the fight against the war, while the U.S. wanted to make sure that any help it gave would also benefit its own economy and security. The leaders couldn't agree on everything, and that left people wondering if there would ever be a solution that made both sides happy. A third question that people were asking was, how would this meeting change global politics in the future? The meeting between Zelensky and Trump was a huge event. It wasn't just about the two leaders. It was about how this conversation would affect countries all over the world. Many countries were watching to see what the U.S. and Ukraine would agree on. Would the meeting help create stronger alliances? Would it change the way countries in Europe and the rest of the world looked at the war? Or would it create more conflict and divisions between nations? These questions showed how uncertain the future was. Diplomacy, or the way countries talk and negotiate with each other, is not always about getting quick results. It takes time. Building trust between nations doesn't happen overnight. Both sides need to understand each other's needs, and sometimes that takes months or even years. It involves making compromises and finding ways to work together, even when it's difficult. The meeting made it clear that diplomacy is a long-term process. It's about more than just talking. It's about making decisions that affect the future. While this meeting didn't end with an agreement, it was a step in the process of finding a solution. Both leaders were still talking, and even though the questions were unanswered, they showed that the process was still ongoing. This uncertainty is a common part of international talks. When countries meet to discuss important issues, the results are often not immediate. There is usually a lot of back and forth, and many discussions happen behind closed doors before any public announcements are made. The meeting between Zelensky and Trump was a good example of this. Even though the world was waiting for answers, the leaders knew that their talks were part of a bigger picture. In the world of international relations, things don't always go as planned. Sometimes, even when talks happen, both sides leave without a clear solution. This doesn't mean that the talks were a failure, though. It means that more work needs to be done. There is often a lot of waiting and wondering before any final answers come. Language. Tip. In times of uncertainty, we often use words like will or can to show that we are unsure about what will happen. For example, will the U.S. continue to provide military aid? Is a question that shows we don't know what will happen in the future. Another way to express uncertainty is to say, it remains to be seen, which means we don't know yet what the answer will be. Practicing questions like this can help you improve your English fluency and feel more comfortable talking about big global events. The aftermath of this meeting is a reminder that diplomacy is not always easy. It's full of questions and challenges, but it's also a reminder that sometimes the answers come slowly. Countries need time to figure out what is best for them and for the world. It might take months or years to reach a final decision, but every meeting and every discussion brings them closer to a solution. The questions raised in this meeting are not just about the U.S. and Ukraine. They are about the future of international relations. How will countries work together to solve problems? How will they manage conflicts and find peace? These are questions that don't have easy answers, but they are questions that will shape the future of the world. And while we may not have the answers today, we know that the process of diplomacy is important. It's a process that requires patience, understanding, and the willingness to keep talking, even when the answers are not clear. This meeting between Trump and Zelensky showed us that even the most powerful leaders in the world don't always have easy solutions. But they are working toward answers, and that's the first step in finding a way forward. The unanswered questions from this meeting are just a part of the ongoing process of building relationships and finding peace in a complicated world. This story teaches us important lessons, not just about politics, but also about communication, negotiation, and leadership. Leadership requires tough decisions. Leaders must make choices between different priorities, and they often have to do this under a lot of pressure. It's not easy, and leaders must think carefully about what is best for everyone. Negotiation is about understanding, not just winning. Both Trump and Zelensky had strong opinions, but they had to find a way to agree on something. The real challenge was understanding each other and finding a solution that worked for both sides. In life, it's important to listen to others and try to understand their point of view, not just think about winning. Words have power. How we speak can help us build trust with others or create problems. Leaders carefully choose their words because they know that what they say can change the way people think and feel. The words we use matter in all conversations, and they can help make things better or worse. Diplomacy is a process, not a single event. Solving big problems takes time. It's not something that happens all at once. Every conversation is a small step toward a solution. When working on any big problem, we need to be patient and keep talking to find the best answer. These lessons are not just for world leaders. They can help us in our daily lives too. Whether you're talking about a business deal, a job opportunity, or a personal problem, the way you communicate matters. The way you express yourself can make a big difference in how you solve problems and build relationships with others. So, what do you think? Do you believe these leaders will find a way to peace, or will their differences cause more problems? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. Thank you so much for joining me here at English Mastery Hub. If you found this lesson helpful, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave a comment. Your support helps us create more useful lessons for you. Keep practicing your English, stay curious, and I look forward to seeing you in the next video.